Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So, today we have a very special guest. We are talking to Hung Lee about community. Thank you, Hung Lee. Thank you for
Hey,
joining us.
my pleasure to be speaking with you, Juliana, and hello everybody. Lovely to see you all.
So, Hung, uh, just a moment here. Sorry. Let just
Oh, I seem to have lost you.
could you introduce yourself, Hung?
Yes,
Can you hear
sorry.
me?
I can hear you, but you were frozen just a little bit, so I think we have some
Oh, okay.
connectivity problems. But sure. So my name is Hung Lee. I basically curate a newsletter and also an online community called Recruiting Brain Food. And I used to work in the recruiting space, used to be a recruitment agent, worked in house, set up a couple of companies, a couple of tech companies as well. And eventually kind of accidentally stumbled into this space of, trying to just connect people together in conversation, and since that time basically it's been my full-time thing. So yeah, hopefully some of you might be familiar with either the newsletter or the podcast or the webinars or whatnot that I've been doing.
So I don't know if I have already told you about this, but I started following you when I was looking about AI related content and the recruitment industry. And at that time, I felt so happy to find your live shows and podcasts. And so I could not stop following your content and your newsletter.
That's wonderful to hear. I'm really pleased to hear that. So thank you for sharing that with me, Juliana. Sometimes when you're producing content, you're not sure whether people care or it adds any value. So yeah, it's great that's adding something to you.
So I've just watched some of your past interviews, and well, you mentioned that you started your newsletter because kind of internet became too big, and there was a need to a curated source of information. So could you tell us about how did you start the recruiting brain food and a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, this was now maybe 2015, 2016, something like this. And already at that time, the internet was just expanding at such a rate that it was very difficult for us to consistently find great content. You would have to click on 10 things to get to the one thing that was interesting. You'd waste a lot of time, with a lot of clickbait type headlines and websites that kind of trick you to go there. And I just got tired of that, and I realized that I ended up archiving a lot of the content which I found from sources that I found were quite reliably high quality. And over time, I managed to build a really strong database that I use for my own use, and I found it to be super useful for me. And eventually I just thought, you know what, if I had this problem, then perhaps other people also had this issue. How could I make sure that other people had access to this resource? And I just thought maybe I start a newsletter and could share some of the data that way, and perhaps people might be interested in it. So recruiting brain food as a newsletter started like that. It was really a case of the easiest way I can share some of the work I've already done, and hopefully other people get value from it, and that was it.
Yes. So when did you realize that you were doing more than just sharing information, and you had actually created a community, and also that this would be your full-time job.
Yeah, so I guess all of those things kind of occurred in a different moment. So I realized that it became a community when people were talking about the newsletter online without my solicitation. You know, they were just discussing it with enthusiasm and recommending it to the people, and you know, it became itself like a little bit of a topic of conversation. So I thought that, okay, this was something that was super interesting, which is why I did end up creating online community spaces for people to talk to each other. So a big component of recruiting brain food was to become more than just a newsletter, but also provide other ways in which people could find each other and talk to each other and so on. So that occurred, I think, pretty early on, maybe 6 months into doing the newsletter. Where it became kind of a business, it probably became a business in like a two-stage way. So firstly, I never intended for this to ever be a commercial proposition. It was always something that I felt that I was doing in any case, and therefore, you know, it was like small effort to try and make it available to other people. But I remember sort of one moment, again, maybe around 6 months' time, starting it, there was one guy who emailed me back, one subscriber emailed me back, and he said, Hung, I want to sponsor the newsletter. And I actually like didn't understand what he meant. I said, I don't understand. Like, what do you mean sponsor? And he said, yeah, I'd like to sponsor it. And that's all he said. And I said, okay, I still don't understand what you mean. So I kind of ignored him. And the next week, because he's a subscriber, so he gets my newsletter all the time. And then he emailed me back saying, Hung, look, man, I want to sponsor the newsletter. And I said,
Which product?
Which product was? He was a guy that was an Irish guy that worked in the Czech Republic. And I think he basically had a job board or something like this. So super niche, super small marketplace. And he was just very, very insistent. And I kind of thought, you know what, in order for him to go away, I just like set a number to him. I said, okay, Glenn, you can do it for this number. And I had no consideration what it was. And he said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. I thought, okay, so maybe the number was too low, but okay. So we put in a sponsor thing 1 week. And then he came back exactly the next week. He said, "Oh, I want to sponsor again." I said, "Okay, I got to double the price on this because clearly, you know, he's not going away." So I doubled the price, and he still said, "Okay, fine." And then I thought, okay, maybe there's something here. You know, if people are prepared to pay, you know, a reasonable amount of money to advertise their business, then maybe here's an avenue where it could be a revenue generator. And of course, how this happens is that when one company is seen to be sponsoring, then suddenly other people start emerging and thinking, oh, I didn't realize you supported sponsors. And before you know it, I had like 10 companies wanting to sponsor the newsletter. And then that's when I thought, okay, maybe you could use this as like a sideline type of business. You know, it could be decent to, you know, help you pay the rent, let's say, but never anything that could be potentially something you could rely on. So probably for the first year or two, that was the consideration. It was like, okay, nice to have type stuff, but it wasn't really a key earner. It was probably at the year 2 mark, 2 years after starting in the newsletter, that I realized that actually, you know, potentially it could be a very reasonable business to try and run. So yeah, 2 years in, we're now going about 7 years. So I've been doing it, I would say, as a proper business, maybe 5 years now.
Yes. And do you have a team to manage all these stuffs, you know, kind of, how can you do it just yourself alone, or do you have a team? It's super curious about it.
No,
I can't believe it.
It is totally me. And I do get people emailing me saying, yeah, Hung, who in your team does this? And I said, yes, me. It's like, it's only me. So when I started this, I when it became a business, I actually had an experiment, because I've run businesses before and I've actually had teams before and so on. But I felt that we were moving towards a point in the kind of economic environment where it may be possible for one person to run a business totally by themselves. So I wanted initially to experiment very clearly. Okay, can one person do it? So, very much like the Tim Ferriss style, like, can you operate a business with one person, very, very low cost, don't have too many moving parts, and just like form your business in this way. So yeah, I think you can do it. So I would say that yes, there's a lot of work, obviously. Yes, there's lots of things that I do inefficiently that I could do better. And yes, there's loads of opportunity costs that, I haven't taken advantage of because I don't have the capacity. So probably from a purely commercial point of view, I should be hiring a team and building a business and doing those types of things. However, I really enjoy this mode of work. And I feel that sort of it's still like pretty much like an experiment for me, in the sense that, okay, how much can I do by myself? What are the ways in which I could help in different ways? Can the community get involved in some other way? And it seems to be working really well. So I'm really happy with how the state is. And probably it will always be a one-person business, I would say. I don't anticipate there being a situation where there'll be people employed by Recruiting Brainfood.
So which kind of apps do you use in your daily routine, kind of to organize yourself, like?
Okay, so first thing to say is that I'm not particularly organized, right? So I don't do this well. It's not a strength.
Yeah.
So lots of things get missing. But one of the things I've learned actually is that it's okay to not do everything perfectly. So one of the most important lessons I've learned in doing Recruiting Brainfood is that if you kind of hold yourself to a complete perfect standard, then actually that's part of the reason where all of the stress emerges, and why it becomes extremely painful to create content or to have conversations, because you have an unrealistic standard as to what can be achieved. So I've learned that actually it's okay to give your best effort, but it's also okay not to be 100% of the time. If you give genuine effort and get something valuable out there, it doesn't necessarily need to have all of the polish. That includes how I operate. So I, in terms of apps, I don't really use much. I used to be pretty much like using every productivity thing going on. But I realized I was spending a lot of time actually learning the tools and doing things the tools were telling me, and not actually what I needed to be doing. So I would say I've boiled it down pretty much to the brass tacks. The newsletter is built on Substack. I have a webinar stroke live stream that goes out on Crowdcast. I've linked it with various, redistribution channels there, but they work fairly automatically. I use, I'm in the Google Apps universe, so I use Google Apps more or less for everything in terms of production. I use Canva for design. And I use a bit of AI. So it's pretty lightweight in terms of the tooling that I use to operate Recruiting Brainfood.
So in the last few years, as people have become more connected than ever, which kind of behavior or interaction patterns change have you noticed in your followers' engagement? Have you noticed some kind of change in the last few years, or?
Yeah, I absolutely have, and I think I'm really encouraged by it, which is that I think we're all getting a lot more authentic in our communications. So as we do more of interactions online, we get more comfortable in our own skin, so to speak, and we're less precious about appearances, about making things perfect. I think most of us are kind of learning, if you like, that what is easier to produce is actually the best content. So the best content is authentic, sort of raw content that's really timely, that's there, and that's actually really easy to produce, and that's what people are most interested in. We should have learned the lesson actually, maybe 10-15 years or so ago. There was like a huge surge of, do you remember when reality TV first arrived? And it was just like a camera looking at in people's houses, Big Brother type of stuff. And it was like, okay, suddenly that was the biggest hit show that everyone was watching. And that should have really told us a great deal about how we like to consume or what type of content we like to consume. We are, sadly enough, pretty voyeuristic as a species, and we just like to know about what people are up to. And that's basically teaches a lot about what our style of comms need to be. It's not about providing like polished, finished articles. It's simply providing a kind of a window into your life and your thinking. And that often is enough for that to be, you know, the core part of how you you know, tell a story, if you like, about what you do in the world.
So about engagement, do you think that it becomes a little faster, you know, kind of this kind of thing, or you think it's the same?
Yeah, I think engagement is. I mean, we're very intolerant of any latency, and we're increasingly so. So what this means is basically we're very impatient when things are slow. You know, when the website is taking ages to, you know, load up, or when someone doesn't respond immediately to your DM or whatever it might be. We have a sense of tension. So I think we are becoming more and more less and less tolerant for delay, and so engagement is usually quite quick, and we stimulate it. We're actually, you know, learning how to create content which encourages people to engage quickly. Now you can argue whether this is good or bad, but in my view, it's just our kind of natural learning of as to what people want, and we're responding to that by, you know, modifying our own behaviors that way.
So in your opinion, which of your skills were most valuable in building a successful community?
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So firstly, I need to say that there was never a plan around this, right? So there wasn't ever an objective per se. So I haven't really gone through a forensic analysis as to what's gone well or what hasn't. But now that you've asked the question now, Juliana, I'll think about it and I'll respond as honestly as I can. So I think the first thing is maybe that sense of innocence. I mean, you know, sometimes you can be too, how do you say, overly strategic when you're thinking about community. You know, you can design a community, you can, you know, do all of these types of things with an objective or with some sort of outcome. And for me, I think maybe those actually become problematic, because the reason why people join communities and enjoy being in community spaces is when they think there is no ulterior motive. And so maybe my naivete actually helped, because it was pretty clear that, you know, I wasn't really, you know, having any ulterior motive on this. And obviously good things have emerged from this that I've benefited from, but it wasn't the starting point, and it wasn't the driver, and it isn't the driver now. And I think the community senses that. So first thing to do is to understand, I guess, how human beings like to operate. And if they enter a space, they don't want to feel as if they're going to be sold to, or that their data is going to be sold elsewhere, or, you know, something is going to be happening as a hidden price for their participation in this community. It's simply there for people to have dialogue. I get motivated when I see and hear all of these things. I think it's a really powerful thing. I definitely get benefit from it. There's no question. But the benefit is almost like a secondary, it's like collateral benefit, if you like. It's not the core objective, but it seems that it always happens. And that is the, you know, actually a very big inspiration for me, because it means that if I just keep, you know, providing value to the community, or enabling the community members to provide value to each other, then good things are just going to circulate around. And there's no question that, you know, I will benefit, everyone else will benefit. So first thing to do is to think about a kind of a community perspective, not overly designed, not overly strategic. Think about what's healthy for the community, and good things will emerge from this. Second thing I would say is you need to understand when to step back from the community. So what I mean by this is that even though I personally have things to say, and there's things that I'm super passionate about, some things that I'm super annoyed about, but I tend not to like necessarily interject into that community with my opinion. Now that's sometimes really hard to do, because you might feel very strongly about these things. However, part of the role of a community organizer is to not be a big player in the community. It's almost like being like refereeing a football match. The referee should not be the big star, right? A good football match, the referee should almost be invisible. The play should occur. The players are the stars. They're the ones that need to be doing sort of being on the pitch. Referee should be invisible. If you're a community moderator, you basically should be the referee. You set the rules, you police the rules as best you can. Only when you need to do you have to intercede and make some corrections. But generally speaking, you're not leading the conversation particularly in that way. So that I think is something that is difficult to do. I don't think a lot of community organizers particularly like to do that, because it ends up, them being overwhelmingly the dominant figure within the community. And that actually turns into just like a broadcast where one person is saying to everyone. Now remember that I have a newsletter, of course. The newsletter already is that for me, because I send to 35,000 people, however many there is, and that's a very powerful one-way sort of distribution. So I don't need to do the same thing in a community space where other people, I think, have more a kind of opportunity to have peer-to-peer conversations, and I need to step away from it. So the ability to not put your ego in and pull it back and let other people talk is one of the skills I think can help a community thrive. Third thing, and this is where I don't think I'm particularly strong, but the third thing is you also have to enforce the rules. So every community has rules, whether they're explicitly stated or they're implicitly understood. It means that if you come and participate in this community, here are the things that are okay to do, but here are the things that are not okay to do. Now, what happens when you get transgressors? You always will get someone who breaks a rule somewhere. And what is important here is for a community organizer to be very clear on how you deal with that transgression. You need to deal with it in a timely way, so it needs to happen a quick response. You also need to deal with it fairly, so you're not like being a destructive person to any relationship. Certainly, you shouldn't be bullying anyone or anything of this type. But at the same time, you need to do so in such a way that other people see it, because it means that it helps them understand that this is not a fake rule, but it's a real rule, and you need to kind of adhere to it. So, using another analogy, this is kind of similar to a school teacher in a classroom. We've all been in classrooms where it's complete chaos, because the school teacher in this case has lost control. It sort of doesn't enforce the rules in a kind of a fair way. It seems to be arbitrary in what rules apply to who and when. Everyone doesn't know what's going on, and it eventually just collapses into chaos. And then the same class goes to into the next lesson, and it's complete silence. Everyone's focusing. Everyone knows what's going on because the teacher has already established the rules, right? And everyone agrees to adhere to it. So I think this is quite hard because, for me, I'm not a natural rule enforcer. I'm not a tough guy, Juliana, but yeah, you have to force yourself, because that's the role. You have to force yourself at times to say, okay, I need to have a conversation with this person because, they are breaking a rule. Maybe they're testing the edges of what is permissible, and that's not going to be good because it's against the rules, and they've got to stop that activity. So yeah, 3 things I would say can help make a good community.
But have you ever invited someone because of their bad behavior to invite to go out of the community, something like this? Have you ever?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
There's been moments where you have to get rid of people. Yeah, very very rarely. And I'm an optimist of human nature, and I do believe that most people who want to participate, they want to be there. You can nudge them towards better behavior. But there's sometimes you always get bad actors that have different intent or a different sort of approach. Like for instance, let's say there's a Facebook group on Facebook, 6,000 members or whatever. I think there's only ever been two people that have been removed from the group for repeated transgressions. And those people, I would say, didn't ever intend to be a community member of that group. They saw it as simply a place to exploit things. And when you see that, then you got to go. So you have to take that control. But again, you have to be very parsimonious with this because it's actually quite a strong bit of authority, and that can be abused by the referee. I mean, this is why I'm generally against deplatforming. I'm against eliminating people or getting them off the platform because they say something I disagree with. I do believe that it is very important for us all to have a diverse set of opinions. So for me, diversity isn't necessarily skin color. It's not about gender. It's about diversity of opinion and the ability to have dialogue on those types of opinions without fear of repercussion. And I think we're moving towards a world where we do fear the repercussions, and we often are afraid to say the truth because of this. And I think when we're in that situation, we make ourselves vulnerable to propagandist type people who are able to work on this fear of repercussion and drive the narrative in a different direction that we don't want it to go. So I'm a big believer that everyone should have their say, but within the guide rules that have been created by being part of the community. You have to be respectful. You cannot personally attack anybody. You can articulate your case, but if it ever descends into rancor, then things have got to stop. It's a challenge for us all to be able to interact with people where we might have very strong disagreements, but try and do so in a way where ideas are exchanged. And maybe agreements aren't reached, but at least we can hear what those ideas are, and then have a better understanding as to why this person feels the way they do. I think if we get to that point, we'll all be kind of better in recognizing, the very easy to understand human motives behind most of the ideas that exist in people's heads. I think we're actually very, very similar. We're all a little bit more scared than we like to be. We're all a little bit sort of want more than we have. We're all, we all have these very common emotions. And we reach for ideas and solutions, and some of the solutions that we reach for are going to be different from the solutions that other people reach for. But fundamentally, our drivers towards those things, those basic human needs that we all share in common.
And what is your untrainable superpower, Hung?
My untrainable superpower, I don't think it's actually particularly a superpower. And in fact, I think that AI is going to immediately disintermediate this superpower. But I'm actually, I've always been quite good at synthesizing lots of diverse bits of information. So what this means is there may be like multiple different domains that necessarily are not related to each other, but I'm able to ingest all of that and then spot some trends that actually are similar or patterns that might relate to each other, and then be able to say, oh, hey, listen, this is interesting. See how this works like that. So this is something that ChatGPT can do very easily now. So it's not like a superpower at all. But it's something that I've always been reasonably good at this. And it's probably been, a big core of my success when I was at school and university and stuff. And it's been a big part of what Recruiting Brain Food is, like being able to spot ideas that often are coming from non-mainstream sources that actually have application in our world. So it's like, okay, Can we learn something from an unconventional space that we could apply to something that is conventional? So yeah, I would say that's a skill I have, not a superpower, and probably something that's going to go away as something valuable pretty soon, I would imagine.
When you were at school, you were kind of boy, super popular boy that talks with everyone. You were like this guy, or more likely to be a shy boy?
No, somewhere in between. So
Between?
I definitely wasn't I definitely wasn't like one of those super popular everyone loves hung at school. No. But I think I was more or less like I wasn't how would I say, I probably was quite popular without being a hero. So in other words, I was able to interact with different groups in school, with no hostility. So it could be the sports guys I was hanging around with, or it could be just the nerds, or it could be whatever it is. I personally was never part of any group, so I was always a little bit of a in a liminal space, if you like, floating around in between the groups, but in such a way that I was never like fully rejected or fully accepted by any of them. That's probably a little bit of a result of my background, because I moved around a lot when I was a kid, similar to you, Juliana. So I was born in the Netherlands, for instance, lived in Germany, then moved to the UK. So I grew up in a country that was actually my third country. And of course, from an ethnicity point of view, you might be familiar with this also, Juliana. I grew up in a place that was 100% white. It was not like ethnically diverse at all. So in many respects, I was always like having an outsider view within these communities that I was sort of part of, and probably that's why I ended up doing a lot of community stuff, because I came very interested to know, why communities form, why there's a gate in communities, why it's not always obvious that people can belong to those places, why you're often reminded that you don't fully belong in those places, all of these things. So this is probably why I ended up actually academically studying groups. So I did anthropology at university because I wanted to study things like tribal formation or factional formation. How do cultures emerge? How do cultures split? Those types of things. So yeah, probably there's an ongoing trend going way back to when I was a kid in the northeast of England.
Okay, so when it comes to content that drives engagement, I've heard you saying that you should never finish your thought when you're creating content. So could you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so have you seen the film Pulp Fiction, Juliana?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Everyone's seen the film, right? So Pulp Fiction was a really good example of a story that was not complete. So remember at the beginning of the movie, Quentin Tarantino just drops you immediately into the story with no context, no explanation. It's like straight away you're into the thing. And you have to try and work it out. There's lots of holes. There's no explanation. There's no exposition. You just along for the ride. It's one of the most amazing movies ever, and it really was a revolution in storytelling. And the reason why it is so compelling is because it is incomplete. It is full of holes. It is full of places where the director has not given the audience the information. And the reason why we're compelled by it is because those holes are an invitation for us as the audience to fill them. So it becomes an interactive story. Modern content is basically Pulp Fiction. You're there to kind of create some themes, but you got to leave some space for the audience to complete the story. And this is what is successful online, certainly the social world, the online social world. You'll notice that the content that goes furthest, most virally, are the ones that kind of invite the audience to participate in completing the journey. Now, this is goes back to the earlier comment I made about sort of being aware of the dangers of perfectionism. because a perfect piece of content that's completely polished, that is, deeply researched, that has a complete argument, offers only one choice to the audience, which is you either consume this information or you don't. Right? That's basically it. All you can do is accept this truth or go away. And that's the old way of doing content. Obviously, most people go away. The new way of doing content is not this is the truth. It is, hey, I've thought about this. I think it looks like this, this, and this. What do you think? And it invites the audience to basically have a dialogue. So another more simpler way to think about this is that it is conversation rather than content. So we need to kind of do conversational marketing, if you like, rather than content marketing. We need to talk to the audience because the audience wants to talk to us, or at least the audience that might emerge is going to want to talk to us. And that is what the audience wants. That's also what these platforms want. Remember, the platforms want engagement. They want sort of content not to just be read. They want people to comment. They want people to reply, reshare, repost, whatever it is. Well, guess what? If you are able to kind of have a conversation with people, then that encourages their contribution, and that gives you the algorithmic boost that to viralize the conversation. So yes, you should never finish your thoughts, because firstly, there is no end of the story, right? Whatever sort of definitive conclusions that we think we might have about the world is always surprising us about what is true or not. And the world is very dynamic. It changes all the time. So what is true yesterday may not be true tomorrow. And so we need to let go of the definitive truths that we have, and then just understand that knowledge is a journey towards no end. It's the journey itself is what we need to work at, and make sure that we just simply go forward with a view, with an open mind, absorb new information, have dialogue over it, chew over it, and then share it, and then keep that conversation going. And I think we'll end up being a lot more mature, more calm, if you like. If you look at the people who are particularly stressed online, and I think probably particularly stressed in real life also, they're the ones that actually are the ones that are holding on to truth for dear life, right? Like they have a particular premise about their world, and that premise is under challenge because they see things in life and experience that is contradictory to this, and they have a real mental breakdown because of this, and they hold on to this truth for dear life. And I think that's just a path towards it's a path towards anger and fear, because deep down, a person who is always pressing their point is secretly lacking confidence in the validity of that point. Like if you know something's true, you're not particularly excited about it, right? I know 2 + 2 is 4. That's true. Do I get hyper angry if someone says 2 + 2 is 6? I don't get angry. I think, okay.
You don't care. Like, yes.
I think you're wrong, but that's okay. You're wrong, But in those moments where something I think is true, someone contradicts me, I get super annoyed. The reason why you're annoyed is because you secretly think the other guy might have a point. And you are scared to face the point. So I think the journey towards maturity here, and this is where we're leaving Brave Food and Community way behind. We're talking about like personal maturation. But the journey that I think we're all on, whether we're conscious of it or not, is can we handle uncertainty? Can we continue to explore with an open mind? Can we actually go back a little bit to our childhood, where we were far less zealous, far more inquisitive, far more curious about new information, and far less like holding on to these truths. We were curious when we were kids, and we loved to learn new things because it was wondrous to learn something that was previously thought was not true, that is now true. That was a marvelous revelation. It was almost like a constant cycle of revelation when you're a child. We kind of need to return to that mentality. Because as we progress in the world today and what we know about how information is created, how it's distributed, how it's supplied, who controls it, etc., etc. We are beginning to understand that a great deal of what we thought was true actually may not be, or may just be a perspective of the truth, but not the full picture. And we need to be comfortable with that fractured reality, you know? And I think it is still a wonderful thing. It's like, okay, the world is just more exciting than I realized that it was. And you have an optimistic view on it, and actually the world becomes a lot more wonderful and a lot less fearful at the same time.
Very interesting. Let's about engagement. I have another question for you. It's, do you think that having a huge engagement in most cases shows that this is a relevant content or not? It depends. Tell me about what do you think about this? About engagement? Yes.
So firstly, the engagement, as long as, let's say it is not, if your style of whatever content it is, if it's got a conversational style, then it's almost irrelevant what the topic is. Because people like to engage in everything. You can talk about football, it could be engaging. You can talk about the weather, it could be engaging. You could be talking about your food, it could be engaging. So all of these trivial things could still be very engaging. So I guess the message there is your content doesn't have to be profound. It simply could just be a thing if you've kind of designed it in such a way that allows other people to contribute, then it could be engaging. Now, is engaging content a measure of quality? I would say not necessarily. I think there's a lot of stuff that is engaging that is actually particularly bad quality. So for instance,
yes.
We know that we are, and this goes back to my earlier point where people get super angry. We know that content that stimulates anger actually is the most effective if engagement is your only measure. So let's say I only cared about the number of likes I got or the number of retweets I got, then I would say something that was super controversial in order to get people who endorsed my position to go public and endorse it, but also to get people who hated my position to go public and dispute it. And then I've got two bodies of people to help move the engagement. So I think that engagement shouldn't necessarily be the motivating factor behind anybody creating content. It should just be, can I create something that stimulates thought and gets people talking? But also, I guess the moderating influence behind all of this is to understand, I guess, your own responsibilities to the universe. I have this kind of COD theory, like a pet theory. So I'm not a profound person in this respect at all. But I do have like one of the small rules I have is to say, you know what, if you're going to do anything external, if you're going to externalize anything, consider whether your externalization is going to be a +1 to the universe or a -1 to the universe. If I'm just angry and I want to vent and I just want to complain about something, get it off my chest, you know what? I actually don't do that because I think that's going to be a -1 to the universe. I think, okay, I'm upset for whatever reason. Find some other way to deal with it. Do some press-ups or something. Go for a walk. Do something where you're controlling your emotions and you're not externalizing negativity, because that can actually depress a lot of other people. That's not what you should do. The world already has enough challenges without you deciding to add your little bit of challenge to it. Your responsibility is to deal with your own stuff. However, if you're going out there and you think, you know what, I can put a +1 to the universe in some way, then go ahead and externalize it. I think that some sort of philosophy of that type, some sort of sense that you are a participant in the universe, an active participant in the universe, and you have a responsibility to make it a healthy universe because you have the power to make it an unhealthy one. I think that can help moderate your strategy when it comes to engagement. Because it means that, okay, maybe you shouldn't just post this because it gets engagement, because actually it's going to create a lot of negativity. Perhaps you should think, how can I do so in a way that creates a lot of positivity instead? So yeah, you gotta moderate like that.
So when do you evaluate yourself as a content creator taking like metrics seriously, or you are more about having great, kind of feeling, I'm having great feedbacks and it's like I'm doing great. So how do you measure yourself or analyze yourself as a content creator? Or
I don't spend huge amounts of time doing it. I've got to be honest. So this may be one of those moments where having nobody around is an impact, because I don't really have time to observe the metrics. So this is not something that a professional, like I still consider myself like an amateur enthusiast, right? So that's kind of an excuse for me never to actually implement professional metrics. But the reality of it is, the kind of core values of doing Recruiting Brain Food was always to try and just go on this journey, and always to try and just make sure the ecosystem is healthy. And so long as I feel that I'm still doing that, then that's the only real measures that I care about, to be fair. So if I can see that people get value from the newsletter, or I can see enthusiasm from, when I'm doing a live stream, or when people are responding to when I say, hey, can anybody help with this? And people come and start helping, then I start thinking, you know what, I'm probably those are the measures that I think make the most difference. So I'm not looking necessarily at things like open rates or click-through rates, or the stuff that marketing people think are important. They are important, but then the secondary importance to me, for me, the most important thing is, this is a wonderful industry we're in. It's very, very complicated. It's really not connected, really. I mean, I don't know that many people in Brazil, which is why I'm really pleased to be speaking with you and all of your Brazilian audience here, Juliana. So yeah, I still think it's very much a work in progress to try and connect more people, get more information flow. Let's learn from each other. Let's give each other support. Let's figure out what our problems are, where they're the same and where they're different. I think all of those are really stimulating for us. And it's great to do that, in a community of like-minded professionals. So yeah, those are the things that I would judge success or fail by, not necessarily the tactical marketing metrics, so to say.
But do you have the feeling that, oh, I know my audience, I know what they need, what they like? You have this feeling, isn't it?
A little, I wouldn't say
opinion.
It's a feeling. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a feeling, but it's more like, because I'm like super well connected these days, you pick up information by having a large network. And if you have a large network, you kind of get a vibe that, okay, this is an important thing, this needs to be discussed, or this is now, people are bored of this, we need to move on from there. So there's an intuition for sure, but it comes from, if you like, ambient data that you pick up from all of these different sources and networks that you're part of.
Okay. So let me just, actually, I have some research about community, but it was too technical, I would share with you, but it was kind of a little complicated. But I have two questions related to this research and about growing community. And let me see if you agree or not. So in this research, they say that the conclusion is that when your own connections know each other, you are more likely to feel supported. So the first thing is this, and the other one is about being better when the community is smaller. So could you tell us about what do you think? Because when it's smaller, kind of, maybe your community is different, but when it's smaller, it's kind of under control and you have high level engagement, and you feel comfortable. It's like, I'm feeling home. You have this feeling when you are part of a small community, and when it kind of become bigger, maybe things get lost. So tell me about your thoughts about this.
I think they're really interesting observations, and I actually would agree with them both. So the first thing about peer-to-peer connections, I think you're absolutely right. It's not a community unless the people there can discover each other and talk to each other without you being there. So if it's the case where the person that set it up needs to still be the key linchpin, then you don't really have a community. You have a mailing list. You have a database. And they're not talking to each other. So creating spaces where people can interact, I think, is still a core part of what I try to do. And getting them to talk to each other, or allowing the opportunity for that to happen, is a big component. Now, when you're talking about sort of the size of a community, I think, again, you're absolutely right. Naturally, the numbers of people that you can know or be intimate with in person is actually quite low. So I think the Dunbar number, I think it's called, is about 150. This is some anthropology stuff where they said, most people you kind of know by name might be that number, and then beyond that, they're kind of really distant. Social media has changed that. And it's changed it in a very unique way, because it means that I don't think the number of 150 changes, but more people might know you in a asymmetric way. So it's possible for you to build a very large asymmetric sort of relationship with large numbers of people. Now, this is kind of strange, but it's also very interesting, and I don't think it's a negative. It's just a new thing that we've discovered through, the availability of new communication technology. Now, one of the things I think is definitely true, just going back to size, is that I think it's a mistake to try and get the whole community to operate like a small community. So let's say if you have a community of 5,000 people, that 5,000 people are not going to behave like 50 people. It's too big. People are going to be lost. They don't know what to say. Typically, what will happen is that they'll factionalize anyway and form sub-communities and so on. So, one of the reasons why, I love to go on shows like yours, Juliana, is because I see that, this should be its own community. I'm not trying to pull this into Brain Food per se. It's like, what is Brain Food? Maybe it's just a very diffuse idea that all communities of recruiters and HR people can be part of in some way. But I don't necessarily need to control all of that. I don't necessarily need to force people into a single umbrella, so to speak. I think it's much better if different sort of communities really self-organize in their own way, in a decentralized way, but there's a way to connect back to a larger community if they wish. And I think that's naturally how communities work. So again, I see it very much as I love ecology and I love biology as the core analogies for what communities are, because human beings are, of course, biological organisms and social communities are biological aggregates. And so it's right for us to think about communities in this organic way rather than a mechanic way. And a couple of rules here. Number one, you don't design a community, you don't design an organism. What you do is you create the conditions for the community to thrive. So we're not architects, we are gardeners, right? If you want a community to thrive, then you prepare the ground and you sow the seeds and you protect it a little bit, but you're not designing the individual plants, right? You are allowing it to thrive based on the conditions you've created. And you're not trying to force every single plant into your plot. You're trying to actually spread the plants out so they create different communities in different places. So one of the things I'm really trying to encourage is this diffusion of community. So in other words, people going out there like you now, setting up a podcast, go and create a community, go and get a newsletter going, go and get a webinar, do a meetup, do all of these things. That would bring me a great deal of joy to see it, because I can see that like a seed that has been planted far away. that might now thrive in a very fertile environment, and become a thriving community that would still spiritually, if you like, be a daughter community of Brain Food, let's say, but not a community that I have any authority over or any management control over or anything like that. It's like, that's great that this has happened, and this has flowered in this different place. So I think that's a positive thing. The community that I've been fortunate to be part of and to help grow has been so valuable to me personally. I would love to see that value replicated as many times throughout the industries and throughout different parts of the world as possible. So yeah, we need to, again, use biologic examples. Virus is probably not a good sort of positive example, but let's imagine it being a seed, right? So we need to distribute the seeds far and wide, and let's see where they grow.
It's a great example. So do you identify any relevant period that you had significant growth related to your content? Or like you grow continuously and kind of?
Yeah, so basically, if you're talking about audience growth or community growth, it kind of just like now trends naturally in a certain direction without like huge spikes. And maybe people can kind of why I think that is simply there is a network effect. So in other words, the larger the community you have, community meaning just network, the more visible or discoverable it is, and then the more people are likely to join it. So it's one of those where it is like there's a gravitational pull to large communities, basically. So that basically occurs, I think, without any particular marketing effort or growth effort from me, which is positive and negative, because I should put more effort into growth. But yeah, where it spikes is basically when you kind of pull off a stunt or a one-off event or something that occurs that's outside of norm, can usually give you a boost of growth. So this could be, let's say you go to a new event that you haven't been to, you give a talk there, then yeah, maybe that would give you a growth. If I launch a campaign of some type, or I do some sort of project that is outside of business as usual, that can also give you some sort of growth. So, I mean, I guess from a practical point of view, if there's anybody out there that's kind of building community now, you might have a organic way of increasing your numbers, so to speak, by 2% a week or a month or whatever it might be. That's all well and good. But you can occasionally, maybe once a month, pull off some sort of event or pull off some sort of stunt, and that will give you, an extra couple of percent. And probably you should keep doing those things, and the growth will continue. But yeah, like I say, that's dependent on your capacity and your motivations to do that.
So do you have any other tips for those who are, kind of starting to build a audience and community?
I think that the main thing is make sure that your North Star, meaning that your guiding star, is going to be sustainable. So where I see a lot of communities fail is when they're basically like utilitarian, like people basically want to create a community in order to, acquire email addresses to sell in future, or we're going to try and sell software to people, or whatever it might be. Ultimately, that's not going to be sustainable, because actually growing a community is like really hard work. It's something that takes huge amount of time and effort, and it's not something that you can casually achieve, I don't think. So yeah, what is the guiding star? What motivates you? Would you do it if there was no money involved? And if those answers are yes, then there's a good chance you're going to you can be successful in some way. If it's completely utilitarian, then basically you're going to have to kind of expect a financial return, I suppose, for all of the effort that you put in. And that financial return is going to be just very disappointing, I'm sorry to say, and you'll give up. So yeah, if you want to do it, just understand what your core motivation is.
Yes, I have some final questions. So I don't know if you're going I choose some just two or three questions from the 20 questions for you to answer.
Oh,
So
wow, big one.
would you, oh, so your followers are curious about, I'm sure. So if you started, no, it's not it said. Sorry. If you wrote a user manual for how people should interact with you, how would you be what would be the most important point in the manual?
Yeah, basically, I think it's pretty straightforward. Like I'm actually very low maintenance, but I expect low maintenance in return. And this probably makes me like a bad manager, let's say, or someone who, if you're not like super secure in yourself, sometimes that can be difficult because I'm not particularly good in giving like validation overly often. So if I could write just one liner as a how-to, is say, look, this person is zero maintenance actually, so you don't need to manage me in any way, but I also don't expect to manage you in any way. So be very honest with what you want, and I'll give you a yes no whether I can do that, and then how it might be done. So yeah, no like emotional overhead, I would say, is probably the thing I would underline.
The other one is what is the number one thing you would recommend every person in the world to practice from now on in order to increase their happiness and well-being?
Wow,
this one is hard.
It is.
Yes.
I will say, I'll be honest with this, and I would say get into an exercise routine. And I don't mean going to the gym for 5 hours or doing whatever. The exercise routine could be something very simple you could do for 5 minutes a day. But I think a large component as the reason why people are unhappy is because we spend too much time in our own heads, and we're thinking too much. And if you're sitting there just rattling those ideas in your head and nothing else is happening, I think inevitably you're gonna stumble on a few mental knots that you're not going to be able to unpick. But if you did physical activity, it forces you out of your brain. You have to use your brain in a different way to mobilize your body. And I think if you did that on a regular basis, your mood will improve. So we need to improve our physical activity. That's my tip.
It's like intentionally turning off for some time every day. It's like something
Correct.
like this.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last one. What is the best piece of professional advice you have ever received? Who gave it and when?
Oh, super interesting. So let me first say I'm against advice in general. Very truthfully, I think that most advice is like autobiographical in the sense that people who give you the advice are really talking to themselves. And it's like, okay, do they know anything really about your situation, about your context? So I think to be skeptical of advice is the most important thing. And in fact, that is my advice. So listen to your own voice. Ultimately, the question isn't what would Jesus do in this situation? The question is what would Juliana do in this situation? Because Juliana is the person that knows the context better than anybody. And if you're honest with yourself, then you'll find the right answer more often than not. So it's almost like trust your own voice. It's your best friend, and it's a better friend than any other external advice can be.
Okay, so do you have any, kind of something to tell for the Brazilian audience?
I have no words of advice other than to say thank you for listening. I would love to get to know you better. Brazil is a country that I would love to visit one day. And one day this will happen. Yeah, one day, of course, it will happen. I have some good Brazilian friends that are in Europe, and I would love to come and visit. I would just say this. Remember that it's super important to speak to each other, to connect with each other. and to learn from each other. So the information flow goes not only from the big sort of audience out, disseminating in this way, but also bilaterally in individual connections, one-to-one peer exchanges. Keep doing that, and make sure you actually, if you want to monitor something, that's actually something worth monitoring. How many conversations one-to-one have I had with my colleagues or my friends or my industry peers this week? How many industry peers have I met in the last month? You should probably monitor that and make sure you're not isolated and you're not just like imbibing digital content, but actually getting into the real world and speaking to people and getting information from the street.
Okay, Hung, thank you so much. I enjoyed a lot. So, when I watch your live show or listen to your podcast, or sometimes I just pay attention on how you engage with your community. So it's a school for me. I have been learning a lot with you. So thank you so much. And well, that's it. And thank you everyone that you watched this live show, and it was easier than I could. It was easier because you helped me. Thank you so much. And that's it. Have a good night, and bye everyone. See you next time. Bye bye.